Hello, people, once again. This is Chris, the Echo teacher. I wish to welcome you again to this week's episode. And today we shall be looking at the topic energy. I want to extend my gratitude to those that continue supporting by subscribing to my channel and liking and even leaving a comment for improvement of future such lessons. I trust they are going to be helping our students. So in this topic today, we shall look at a brief introduction to what energy is. Then we will look at sources of energy. We will be looking at renewable sources of energy as well as the non-renewable ones and the advantages and disadvantages of each of the sources of energy. Then we shall look at the development of hydroelectric power in Kenya. And specifically we shall be looking at the Seven Forks dams. Then we look at examples of other hydroelectric power plants in the wider Africa. Then we shall look at geothermal power in Kenya. Then we will move on to the significance of energy to our country and overall. Then we shall look at the oil crisis. We shall look at what the oil crisis is, what causes oil crisis. We shall look at past oil crisis that the world has experienced in the past. And then we shall look at management and conservation of energy to end our topic. So let us begin by looking at what energy is. Energy can simply be defined as the power required to carry out an activity. Whatever is providing that power that will make an activity to happen is what we refer to as energy. And we shall be looking at a wide range of sources of this energy so that we understand that it is not just about electricity, but anything that is providing the power that is required to have an activity taking place is what we call energy. Now we will look at sources of energy, and to begin with we shall be looking at renewable sources of energy. Later we shall be looking at the non-renewable sources of energy. Now just to notice that the renewable sources of energy are inexhaustible. They keep reproducing and therefore they are inexhaustible. They will not be exhausted even with continuous use. So one of the renewable sources of energy is solar, or the energy that we get from the sun. Now this solar energy can be used for heating and it can also be used to produce electricity, and we shall look at, I think at the end of this slide, we'll look at some of the ways that we can use solar for direct heating by concentrating the rays of the sun, and then we can use it for heating, or even in modern ways where we use solar water heaters. Now it has numerous advantages by the fact that it is renewable. One is that it is cheap. The sun is available throughout this world, and it is not made by anybody, and therefore it is not sold to anybody. It is available, it is cheap. Number two is that it requires minimal maintenance. Once you have installed your solar panel, or once you have installed your heating system, then it does not require much of a maintenance, because most of the parts are not moving as in other machines like the hydroelectric, where we have turbines which require constant fixtures. But the solar products, they do not require much of the maintenance. Then it is environmentally friendly, and in my classes that is why I refer to myself as eco. I advocate for taking care of this earth, and therefore when it is environmentally friendly, I have to insist on it. Solar energy is the way to go. Solar energy may save this earth, and in future classes we shall see that our problems began when we started using fossil fuels, which are dirty and which are not very friendly to the environment. But solar is very friendly to the environment. Then the good thing about it is that it can be stored in batteries. You can store it and use it even when the solar is not available itself, probably at night. Then the fact that it is renewable, then it is inexhaustible. It does not end, or it is not something that will come to an end anytime soon. And that point should be noted, that it is for all the renewable sources of energy. They are renewable because they are inexhaustible, and that is one good advantage about them. Then it is available in all parts of the world, especially where we are. We are within the tropics. Within the tropics, we do not even experience winter, and therefore solar will be available to us throughout the year. Now this is what I was talking about. There you can see at the bottom there, you can see some mirrors. These mirrors are supposed to concentrate the rays of the sun, and at the top there you can see where you can place your sufuria so that you can heat or you can cook using this system. And I've said we are in the tropics. We do not have shortage of the sun in this region. Like currently where we are experiencing sun, or the sun in real times. So these are some of the things that we can take advantage of this sun to save on trees, and we can use this for cooking purposes. Behind it you can see a solar water heater. Instead of using electricity, we can simply take advantage of the sun that is available to heat our water using that system there. However, it comes with some disadvantage. Of course, anything that has advantages also has disadvantages. One is that it cannot be used to run heavy machinery. We have machines that require a lot of energy, and the amount of energy that we get from the sun may not be that much to run heavy machineries, especially in industries. Number two is that solar panels can be expensive to buy, and especially when you require them in large scale, it could be expensive. The initial cost can be high, but we reap the benefits at the end. Then the batteries that are used to store this energy can be cumbersome to carry around. If you have seen where they install solar lights, street lights especially, you will see the sizes of batteries that are buried underground. Now you can imagine a small car battery, and hey, you can tell how much kilos it weighs. Now when we involve heavier or bigger batteries, then you can imagine that can be cumbersome to move around with. The other problem is that it fluctuates with seasons. We may not have this as a major problem in our tropical region, because either way we do not experience seasons, and therefore either way any part of the year there will be solar. But beyond the tropics, then this can be a serious problem. And even where we are, of course Kenya, to be precise, is arid. The better part of Kenya is dry and receives solar for the better part of the year, but some areas like parts of Nyeri, parts of Limuru, this can be a problem. These are areas that, especially between June, July, August there, we may not see the sun for several weeks. Then to produce some substantial amount of solar energy, then you require large numbers of solar panels. You have seen where we have solar energy being produced on commercial basis. You will find that the number of solar panels that have been installed are way too many, and of course that will destroy the beauty of the land. It will become very expensive, and you will find that an entire field is covered with solar panels, which sometimes may not make much sense. Now we move on to another renewable source of energy, that is solar. I mean wind. Wind can be used for pumping of water using windmills. They can be used for pumping of water. They can be used for grinding of grains. That movement will move the machines that are required for grinding of grains. It can be used to produce electricity. We'll look at cases. It can be used for propelling water vessels. I think water vessels in the past used to be propelled literally using the wind. They would have a big sheet of cloth, and that sheet of cloth will stand in the path of wind and therefore move the dhow with it. Now, the advantages of wind is that it is inexhaustible. We have said that point will score in all the renewable sources of energy. The number two is that it is a clean source of energy. It does not pollute the environment in any way. The land between windmills can still be used for other purposes, unlike solar, where we install solar panels in fields. Where you have windmills, they are way high above, and therefore you can still use the land for other purposes like planting of crops and even trees. Then it can be used to produce it can be produced on small scale and also on large scale. You can literally install a windmill at home, literally for just pumping your own water on small scale basis. We look at the disadvantages. Of course, anything that has advantages will have disadvantages. So one is that windmills for harvesting are expensive to buy and install. They can be relatively expensive to install windmills, especially when you are doing it on large scale. Then the equipment for harvesting is also relatively expensive to maintain. Then they need that rotating pattern, or where the machines keep rotating. That means they will continue being undergoing wearing, and therefore they need constant maintenance, which can be expensive. Unlike solar, which does not require much of maintenance, but this one requires a lot of maintenance. Then many windmills will be needed to produce meaningful energy. You need many of them, and I think we'll see that in the next slide. And then it fluctuates with the strength and the direction of wind. That's why you'll find that normally they will be installed in areas that are open grounds or on top of high mountains or hills, because the speed of wind increases with increase in height above sea level. So that's why you'll find them on gong hills and other places that are high. Then it's also not available in many parts, in any areas, especially areas that are not open. In most parts, like if you look at central Kenya, the western of Kenya, where we have the area having too many trees, then it may not be a viable option here. So that's why you'll find we have them on Ngong Hills, and then we have another wind plant, I think in somewhere in Turkana, if I'm not wrong, or Marsabit, if I'm not wrong. Then wind farms will also alter the beauty, the scenic beauty. It destroys the natural beauty, and I think we'll look at that in the next slide. So for those of us who are obsessed with the environment, you can see those windmills. We want to see a natural environment with beautiful trees, but when you have all these windmills in this is Ngong Hills, the wind farm, then that destroys the beauty, the original beauty of the natural environment by creating such an environment. So we look at the other renewable source of energy, that is water. Now in water we shall look at several ways in which water can be used as a source of energy. We shall start with geothermal. Geothermal is where you are using steam. If you look at that is Olkaria geothermal power plant. So normally what you do, at the background there you can see some steam. Now that steam is gaseous. Now these gases, they produce steam. So we tap this steam. If you can look at that photograph there, it has a lot of pipings. Now these pipings bring that steam. Now that steam, where you can see the main farm there, where we have the building there. Now this steam is the one that is used to turn the turbines which are inside this room, and then that of course will produce electricity. So that is one way we can use water to produce geothermal power. Now, geothermal power has several advantages that we shall look at. Now, one is that it is cheap because we are just harnessing the geysers, the energy from the geysers, and using that energy to turn the turbine. So we do not need fuel that may increase the expenses. Number two is that it is continuous. It does not it is not affected by seasons. It is not affected by, it is just a continuous process. The wells will always produce the steam. Then it is inexhaustible, just like all other renewable sources of energy. This one is also inexhaustible. The water will always be there. It will produce the steam. Then the cost of operation is relatively low as compared to hydroelectric power. That's why our country is trying to concentrate a lot on the production of geothermal power. Now, it's also a good supplement for other sources of energy like hydroelectric. Hydroelectric is affected by by seasons, especially dry seasons will negatively affect hydroelectric power production. But geothermal is not affected. So when we do not have the hydroelectric power, then we can rely on geothermal. Now, however, it has a few disadvantages. One is that generation plants cause noise pollution. If you have been to Olkaria, you can tell that there's a lot of noise that is produced from those turbines. Then it is not available in many parts of the country, except in our Rift Valley, that is in Naivasha, Olkaria, because if we understand how geothermal power is produced, now the water is being heated by underground rocks that are hot, that are in contact with magma. So this energy will only be found in areas that are geologically active. So we do not find it in any other parts of our country except along the Rift Valley. Then it releases a lot of gases that pollute the environment. If you have been to Olkaria, it comes with hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide, other than the fact that it is extremely smelly, it smells of rotten eggs. Other than that, it is also when the sulfide in this gas mixes with water, because it is soluble in water, it produces a sulfuric acid, which is not suitable for crops. Then the exploration and also the exploitation of this energy, or the geothermal energy, can also be a little bit expensive. Now, the other way of utilizing water in production of energy is the hydroelectric power, or the hydropower. Now, the illustration there shows how water is utilized in generation of hydroelectric power. From the left there, you can see the water flow. The water is collected in a reservoir, a dam. Then the water will be moved in pipes down slope so that it has the energy. Now that energy is what will turn the turbine. You can see the turbine below there. Then that turbine will generate the electricity. You can see the generator. So that is what will produce the electricity, and then it is transmitted along the lines. So that is how water is used to generate hydroelectric power. So we look at the advantages of hydropower. One is that it does not pollute the environment. It's just the water turning the turbine. So we do not have the fossil fuels here, which are a danger for our environment. Secondly is that it is inexhaustible. Water is inexhaustible. We have said all the renewable sources of energy are inexhaustible. Then the energy can be transmitted over long distances. Most of our energy comes from the Seven Forks dams, and we look at where they are located in this country. But the energy we get there is transmitted in all other parts of this country. Then the dams that are created for the production of hydroelectric power can still be used for other purposes, for recreation, the Masinga Dam, for irrigation, for fishing, for transport. So they can be used for a wide range of other activities. Then the power that is produced is used for many purposes. It can be used for transport. Even if we had electric trains in this country, you can still use that energy, because again the amount is substantial. You use it for lighting, for cooking, for cooling, and all other purposes. Then it's also reliable, because it produces a significant amount of energy. So it's reliable in that it can be used even in running of heavy machinery. However, it comes with a few disadvantages. One is that it is affected by fluctuation of water, and especially in this country of ours, where we are prone with even the adverse effects of a drought. We have been having, like even currently, you can tell that we have not been having the rains as we expect. Now that fluctuation in the levels of water in the reservoirs also affects the production of this power. Then the construction of the dams can be relatively expensive, and they also displace many people. You can look at the size of a dam like the Masinga Dam. Now the number of people that are displaced by that, you need to compensate them, and again you affect their way of life by relocating them. It causes inconvenience to migratory species. There are some species of fish that will migrate down and up the river. So when you dam the river, then you reduce that migration of the fish. Now the cost again of running the hydropower plants can be high. They need a lot of maintenance. Then dams can be dangerous. Of course, with the dams aging, with the time they become they become a danger for humans, especially down the dam, because of course they are made from concrete. Now with the time, this concrete will become weak, and eventually they can become very dangerous. Then it's of course not available throughout the world. There are some places that are deserts that do not receive any amount of rainfall, or they receive extremely low amount of rainfall. So this kind of energy cannot be available for such people. Then the other ways in which we can utilize water is tides. Tides can be used in the same way that we have talked about to produce energy. Use the waves again. The force of the breaking waves can also be used to turn turbines, and in turn produce electricity. But we have not reached a level where we are using waves to produce energy in this country. Now let us look at another form of renewable source of energy, that is biomass. Now when we are talking about biomass, we are talking about the wood fuel. Now this can be in form of firewood, it could be charcoal or sawdust. You know those jikos that use sawdust. Now it should be remembered that wood fuel or biomass remains sustainable. It is renewable as long as it is used sustainably. Otherwise, if the rate of cutting down of trees is too high than planting, then biomass may as well not be a renewable source of energy. Now let us look at some of the advantages of using wood fuel. One is that it is cheap. It's a cheap source of energy, and that's why you'll find it being used in most of the local homes, because you just need to get some firewood and then light it. It is especially where it is available, it is cheap. Secondly is that it is available almost throughout the world. Anywhere that we have trees and vegetation in most parts of the world, except in the very dry deserts where we may not have vegetation, but fairly it is available throughout the world. Then does not require any maintenance. It's just 3 stones, and then that's all. You just need the wood itself. Then the ashes that are burned can be used for other purposes, like the use in plastering of houses. Those who are from my generation understand this, that it used to be mixed with cow dung, and then you could use it for plastering of mud houses. Then we have it being used as fertilizer. Remember, ashes is also an anti-acid. It can be used to prevent things like what do you call this that eat maize? Weevils. So the ash that you get there is also useful. It, however, comes with some disadvantages. Like, one, it's dirty. It produces a lot of smoke, a lot of soot, which is also not very healthy for humans. Secondly, is that it pollutes the environment. It emits carbon. Now, what trees or vegetation does is that trees will absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and convert it into inert carbon, inactive carbon. The problem comes in when now you cut down the vegetation again and burn it. The carbon that it had absorbed and converted to inert carbon is then released back into the atmosphere. So that greenhouse gas, that is carbon, is what is causing us problems. Now, it requires big storage areas, and now especially those who use it for commercial purposes. If you have visited a tea factory, you will find that the amount of wood fuel that they use, they require a large area. You'll find that a better part of the factory is set aside for storage of this firewood. Then its overexploitation leads to deforestation. Deforestation will definitely consequently lead to desertification. So the cutting down of trees is something that I wouldn't encourage, even if it is cheap, and that's what we are used to in our local areas. But we should avoid as much as possible. It's even better when you use it as the ash, sawdust. That would be a kind of recycling. But when you use wood directly, then it could lead to deforestation. Now, the other renewable source of energy is biogas. Now, biogas, just to mention before we move on to that plant there, biogas is methane gas, actually, and it is produced by anaerobic decomposition of organic matter. So any form of organic matter that decomposes in limited oxygen produces biogas. Now, that's a typical diagram showing how biogas works. Now, on your left, that's where it begins. We have the mixing tank there. Normally we use cow dung. So normally you'll mix your cow dung there and put it in as influent. It will come to the digester tank. Now, this digester tank, you can see, is enclosed. Now, that enclosure is what ensures that the cow dung, which is an organic material, it ensures that it decomposes in limited oxygen. When it decomposes in limited oxygen, it will produce methane. Then it will go up. You can see the gas holder tank there. Then you can take your gas and use it for cooking and other purposes. On your right there, you have the outlet tank. The more you put on the influent, then we have the effluent on the other side, the waste from coming out on the other side. So that's basically what biogas is. It can still be produced from dump sites, from human remains, from all manner of organic materials. Now, biogas has several advantages. One is that it is inexhaustible, just like all other forms of renewable sources of energy. As long as we have organic materials, as long as we have animals, then biogas will still be there. Then the fuels are efficient and relatively clean. It is very clean, and unlike the gas that we use in our homes, that is LPG, this gas is fairly even more safe, because even if the gas escapes into the atmosphere, then it does not burn, so it never explodes. And it's also very efficient. The energy that it releases is extremely high. Then it is cheap because it makes use of waste products. We are talking about cow dung, and even the cow dung that you use and the one that is received on the effluent side can still be used as manure. So you are still continuing recycling. You get human or cow dung, which is waste, use it to produce gas that you use to cook, Then the waste that you get, you still use it as a manure. Then production is cheap. Other than installing the biogas plant itself, then there's nothing else. It's just about adding the dung, and that's all. There's nothing much. Then biogas, I've talked about this earlier. Biogas gives twice as much heat as natural gas, so it is very effective and very efficient. Then the slurry that is left behind, I've also talked about this. You still use it as a manure, and this time, because it is even more broken down, it becomes even a more effective form of manure. And then it is available everywhere there is biomass. There is remains of animals, remains of human beings. We have too much of organic materials, wastes. All these are available everywhere, and therefore biogas can be produced anywhere. Now let us look at some of the disadvantages of using biogas. One is that biogas digesters require a lot of space. It is a large thing. If you want to produce a substantial amount of biogas, then the plant that is required is large. However, this problem has been solved. The modern biogas digesters, you will normally find them constructed underground, and except where you will put your influent and where the effluent is coming out of, all the other part is underground, so you can still do other activities above that area, like growing of vegetables and the rest. So that is a problem that is solved. Secondly is that it cannot be transported to distant places. One problem that biogas comes with is that scientists have not been able to see how they can liquidify it and put it in containers like LPG. So still, biogas is just used on site. It cannot be transported using containers. Then it causes global warming. I've said earlier that biogas is literally methane gas. Any anaerobic decomposition of organic matter produces methane gas. Methane gas is known to be a very efficient greenhouse gas, much more efficient than carbon dioxide. And actually, it's actually 4 times more efficient than carbon dioxide. So the methane that we are producing here is not right for the environment. It's a greenhouse gas. Now, the other ways in which you can use biomass is through power alcohol. We will not dwell in that a lot. You can read about it. Now we move to another form of a renewable source of energy, that is animal potterage, where animals are being used to provide the energy to work. Now, in a summary, I've shown some of the animals there that can be used to transport or to do work or to provide the energy. You can see the camel there carrying a substantial load. You can see the donkey there carrying water. You can see an oxen being used to provide the energy for cultivation. There's an elephant. The elephants are used a lot in India for transportation and also for logging business, as you can see there. However, just a reminder is that don't try the African elephant. It is much more dangerous than these others. The Indian ones are smaller and relatively domesticated, but ours is extremely wild. So don't attempt to think that you can get an elephant from a forest to do work for you. And above there you can see the horse. The horse is also used for transportation a lot. So these are just part of the animals. In the Arctic region, they use dogs for transport. You can Google that, you'll see how dogs pull carts over the ice, and then they can be used for transportation. Some of the advantages of animal potterage is that, just like all other forms of renewable energy sources, we said they are inexhaustible. Now, animals keep reproducing, so they are still, unless in a situation where the animals or the hunting of animals or the killing of animals is not sustainable. But in a normal situation, animals will multiply, and therefore this source of energy is inexhaustible. Two is that is available in all parts of the world. There are animals all over the world. So even if we have not domesticated elephants here, but we have donkeys. Where they don't have elephants, they have horses. So it's available in all the other parts of the world. Then it is cheap to maintain. Animals will only need food, mainly grass. Those are browsers, and all these animals we have seen, they are browsers, so they just require food and water, and that's all. Then animals are flexible. They don't need a tarmac road, they don't need a railway line. They can move through forest, they can move through small pathways, so they do not need that much of infrastructure. Then after the animal is exhausted, or after you have used it well, then you can now as well slaughter it and eat. So it is a win-win situation. The animal works for you, and eventually you eat the animal. However, they have a few disadvantages. One is that they are prone to diseases and fatigue. Animals, just like human beings, they'll get tired. They're also prone to diseases, and when they are sick, then they cannot work. Their ability to work is reduced. Then they can die. If you subject an animal to too much work, they will die. That's why you have people fighting for animal rights. We have an organization in Karen, just next to Marist International University College. They deal with donkeys, and they rescue donkeys from farmers or from people that exploit them, and take care of them, because some people are too harsh on animals. It is also becoming a concern how elephants are being used in India and other parts of Asia. So when you overuse them, then they will die. Then their use is restricted only to rural areas. You don't expect to find an elephant moving goods around Nairobi. You have not found anybody using a donkey to transport some wheels or some food items from Gikomba to the city center. It is not, even the bylaws of the city don't allow you to have an animal in the city. Then the type of, or the amount of load that they can transport is limited. They will only transport small loads. Of course, they will transport better than humans, but you don't expect them to carry more than a truck. You don't expect them to carry some goods like vehicles and all that, so their use is limited. Then they can only do limited work because they tire easily. Again, just like fatigue, actually, that is related to the first point on fatigue. They will get tired. Now, from there we move to the non-renewable sources of energy. Now, the non-renewable sources of energy will become exhausted. They do not, or they are not created over as we use them. So the use of non-renewable sources of energy will mean that at the end of it, they will become exhausted. That is what non-renewable means here. Now, one of the non-renewable sources of energy is coal. Now, coal is created. Coal is actually a fossil fuel that is made from remains of organic materials, especially dead animals and plants. However, the rate of formation of coal, the number of years required to make coal, means that it requires too many years to convert organic matter into coal. That means the rate of exploitation does not meet the rate of formation of coal. That's why it is non-renewable. Now, the usefulness of coal. Coal was used as the main source of energy, especially after the discovery in the 1900s. During that time when we had the Industrial Revolution, coal was running the economies of the world. But with time, the usefulness of coal has declined for three good reasons. One is the discovery of petroleum later. When petroleum was discovered, it became more efficient than coal, and therefore it became a kind of a competition for coal. And because it was more efficient, then the usefulness of coal declined. Secondly is because of exhaustion. Coal, we have said, is non-renewable. So since the 1900s, the exploitation of coal has led to its exhaustion in old mines. Then it requires a high cost of mining. It requires, especially when it becomes deep. Initially, coal, or when coal is discovered, it's mined through open cast mining. But as the mines get deeper, it becomes more expensive as compared to mining of petroleum, which you just require a well, and as compared to other sources of energy that we are talking about today. So that the three reasons have made the usefulness of coal decline, and therefore coal is hardly used today. And of course, because of again environmental concerns, most of the governments have stopped using coal because of environmental concerns. It's a very dirty source of energy. It produces a lot of carbon dioxide, so again that has reduced the usefulness of coal globally. However, coal still had a few disadvantages. One is that it was efficient in thermal generation of electricity than oil. It is cheaper. So producing thermal energy or thermal electricity is much cheaper using coal than using of oil. Unfortunately, in Kenya, we still use oil in Kipevu, Mombasa. Number two is that it is most suitable in the smelting of iron because it produces a lot of energy and it is cheap. Therefore, smelting of iron requires coal, and that's what is being used in parts of the world in Ginger. And when you'll be looking at industrialization again, when you'll be looking at iron and steel in what do you call that region, we'll see it when we come there. So steel, we'll see that the presence of coal contributed to that existence of that plant. However, it still has a few disadvantages. It leaves a lot of dirt. We have said it's a very dirty source of energy. It's just like the charcoal that we use. So it produces a smoke which is dirty. Formation of smog and smoke which are a health hazard. And China is one country that has refused to move away from coal. And China is faced with this problem of smog. Smog is a combination of smoke and fog. So it produces a lot of smoke. So when it mixes with the fog, then one is that it is a health hazard, and number two, it also leads to poor visibility. So in a later topic we'll see, I think in environmental conservation and management, we will see smog which has literally reduced visibility completely in some parts of China, especially Beijing. Then mining leads to environmental degradation. Now, we have said coal is mined through open cast mining. So where that is done, then it leaves open pits, and that causes land dereliction. Now the other non-renewable source of energy is petroleum. Petroleum again is a fossil fuel. We looked at how petroleum is formed and oil is formed in form to work when you are looking at mining. So again formed from remains of dead plants and animals. So again it is non-renewable. The rate of formation of petroleum does not match the rate of exploitation, and that makes it non-renewable. Now petroleum comes with several disadvantages. One is that it is a clean source of energy. In terms of production of smoke, it does not produce much smoke as compared to coal, so it's relatively clean. Number two, it is cheap to transport because you can use pipelines. And when you'll be looking at transport in a later topic, then one thing that is made easy in the transportation of petroleum, especially when you transport it as crude, it is easily transportable through pipelines. And once you transport it as crude, you can produce a numerous number of byproducts from the same crude oil, so it becomes cheap to transport it by pipelines. Then transport and maintenance costs are low. When you are using pipelines, you don't require much, and even when you are using lorries, just the lorry that requires maintenance. then it's easy to use. It only requires switches and burners. If you use petroleum at home, and I mean like oil, I mean like paraffin, just needs the burner. If you are using it for vehicles, for instance, it's just the ignition, and that's all. Then it is free of the effects of weather changes. It is not affected by weather in any way. If you compare this to hydroelectric power, which will be affected by changes in weather, especially drought. But for petroleum, whether it rains, whether sunshine, it will still be there. Disadvantages of using petroleum: one is exhaustible, just like all other forms of non-renewable sources of energy. It is exhaustible. It will become depleted, and it's actually predicted that by 2050 we will not have oil reserves on this planet. Then it can cause disaster in accidents, gas leaks, and also the leaking of oil can be disastrous. And we have seen that. There was a case, I don't remember the year, but it was somewhere in Mukuru, I don't know which Mukuru again, where people were siphoning oil from a pipeline, and eventually it caught fire and burnt people. All of us remember the case of Sachangwan, where again an oil tanker overturned, and of course greedy people decided to siphon some fuel from there, some petrol, and that disaster killed 110 people. Elsewhere in the world, you have also seen disasters happening, and that can be relatively dangerous. Then it can greatly pollute the environment, and directly oil leaks. I think we saw somewhere, and I think I remember it was somewhere in Makueni, where there was oil leak which had not been noticed. Now when that happens, then the oil in the soil reduces uptake of oxygen. It reduces oxygen in the soil, and that causes pollution, and even plants will start drying up because they cannot take up oil. And again, when fires happen, they release a lot of fumes. It is a fossil fuel, so when it burns, then it releases a lot of carbon dioxide, and which is not good for the environment. Lastly is that it is expensive for low income groups. I think we are currently at 177 per liter of petrol in this country. It is not much. It is not affordable, and even the kerosene that we thought was for the low income earners is 100 per liter, 100 and above 100 shillings. That is not affordable for low income groups. Lastly, we look at the last of the renewable sources of energy. We'll look at uranium. Uranium is used to produce nuclear energy. Now, I will not go to the details of how nuclear energy works because that is not in our concern, but I've shown a simple illustration of how nuclear energy is produced, or a simple nuclear plant. At the top there you can see an illustration. At the bottom there you can see that's a real diagram or a real photo of a nuclear power plant. Now the whole point is using of uranium. Uranium through nuclear fission will produce a lot of heat. So in the reactor there, label number 1 is where the nuclear fission will take place, where uranium will be broken down to produce a lot of heat. Now that heat will produce steam, just like in the geothermal power production. The steam will be the one that will be used to run the turbine. The turbine you can see them in what is labeled there number 4. Then of course the turbine will produce electricity through the generator, and you can see it being transmitted there. Then on the far right there you have the cooling tower. The cooling tower is supposed to use a lot of water. That's what you can see below there, releasing some fumes. It is supposed to use a lot of water to cool the system, because that whole process of nuclear fission will produce a lot of heat. Now, to avoid blowing up of this system, then we need a lot of cooling. That's why you'll find most of these nuclear power plants will be constructed next to a water body, a large water body like the ocean or a lake, because of cooling. It requires a lot of cooling, but I'll not go to the details of that. So we look at some of the advantages of using of nuclear energy, specifically uranium in the production of nuclear energy. One is that it's a long-lasting supply of raw materials. It will uranium will produce the nuclear, the raw material required for production of nuclear energy for a long time. It is you just require very little to produce a lot of energy. Therefore, even if it is non-renewable, it will still supply in the raw material that is required over a long period of time. Secondly is that it produces a lot of energy. There was a plant that was supposed to provide, I think it was supposed to be somewhere in Europe, and specifically I think in France. It was on a pilot program. This plant was looking at supplying the entire energy that is required in this earth or on the world, in the world, from nuclear energy. So it has the ability, it can produce a lot of energy. Then does not pollute the environment in terms of production of greenhouse gases. It does not produce any greenhouse gas, and therefore it is clean as far as that is concerned, but it can also be disastrous to the environment. Some of the disadvantages that it is expensive to construct nuclear reactors. If you look at where nuclear energy has been exploited or is being used, you'll find that most of them are developed countries. The US, Russia, China, Japan, among other developed countries in Europe. It is because of the expense. It can be extremely expensive to construct the nuclear reactors, not to mention the disaster that comes with it. Secondly is that it is extremely difficult to clear nuclear waste. There is actually not a known way of disposing of nuclear waste in a clean way. Now, there are some disasters that have happened in the past. Two of them very known. The Chernobyl in the Russian Federation in 1986. That disaster caused a lot of contamination, nuclear contamination. And then we have the Fukushima in 2011 in Japan. The Fukushima disaster followed an earthquake. Then the earthquake was followed by a tsunami. Then the tsunami got into this Fukushima nuclear plant, because we said they are constructed closer to the shores of the ocean because of cooling purposes. Now that tsunami directly hit the Fukushima power plant, and a lot of nuclear wastes got into the atmosphere, causing a lot of contamination, which led to a lot of serious disaster in terms of vegetation. And I should think from 2011, those are about 12 or so years to date, that area is still unoccupied because of the risk that comes with it. And to clean that nuclear waste, you require to clear entire soil, vegetation, because all of them are contaminated, and the contamination will be transferred into humans. So these are serious disasters that can come with nuclear energy. Then lastly is that it is an exhaustible source of energy. It is non-renewable, so eventually it will become exhausted. Now we will move on to hydroelectric power in Kenya. It is the main source of energy in this country. It has been developed, so we look at that. Now we will go directly into the factors that favor development of hydroelectric power in Kenya. Now we will divide them into the physical factors and the human factors. We will start with the physical factors. One is that a large and volume constant of a large and constant volume of water. Mainly we have many rivers in this country. The river Tana that we will look at in our case of the Seven Forks dams is a permanent river with a lot of water throughout, and therefore it has created the amount of water that is required to produce hydroelectric power without much fluctuations. The presence of waterfalls and rapids along that river at nick points has also favors that. Remember, to produce hydroelectric power, you need to collect water in a dam and then flow it down. So where we have waterfalls and rapids, that helps a lot, and that we'll see when you'll be looking at the Seven Forks dams. Then the deep and narrow valleys. The deep and narrow valley ensures that you reduce the costs of construction of dams. Where it is deep, it will hold a lot of water. Where it is narrow, or then the valley is narrow, then it reduces the construction of the dam itself, the blockade that will form the dam. So it becomes cheaper. Then we have hard basement rocks. The hard basement rocks ensure that water does not infiltrate, so that we do not reduce loss of water through infiltration. Then it will provide a strong foundation for the construction of the dam, so that the dams do not break down regularly. For the human factors, one is sparsely populated areas to minimize the cost of relocating people. We'll look at the Seven Forks dams and where they are located in parts of eastern going to the Tana River County. These are areas that were relatively sparsely populated, and therefore there was no much displacement. So of course the displacement comes with a lot of compensation and a lot of court battles. Two is the presence of industries and urban areas in them to provide the market. If you look at where these Masinga dams, the rest, most of them are constructed closer to Nairobi and other larger towns, Meru, Nyeri, and these of course provide the markets for the market for HEP. Then adequate capital from especially donor funding. We look at the most of our projects, the hydroelectric power projects, are donor funded, so the capital was available. Now we look at the development of the projects themselves in Kenya, or HEP in general in Kenya. Now the low demand for electricity at independence ensured or made it unnecessary to have hydroelectric power in this country. But so initially we did not have the need, because there were no industries. The population was low. At independence, this country had a population of 7 million people, and therefore there was no demand for electricity at independence. But with the coming of with the increase in population and the development in production and other sectors of the economy, then we needed the power to run the economy. So we had the earlier stations, that is Mesco in River Maragua, Ndula in River Thika, and the Sagana in Nyeri, or along River Sagana. So these were the earliest stations to be constructed. Now the rest of the power supply mainly came from the Kipevu diesel plant in Mombasa. That is what provided the other supply of energy. Then we also imported some power from Uganda since 1955. Remember, all these countries, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, at this time were the British protectorate. They were under the British, so it was basically the same kind of government. Now Uganda has a higher potential for HEP, noting that Uganda is receives relatively higher rainfall, and because of that we relied on Uganda to supply us with energy. Now with the demand for electricity, then Kenya identified River Tana as a potential for hydroelectric power production, and that gave birth to the Seven Forks dams. Now they were established along the cascades of River Tana, and we look at the stages, and of course they were not constructed at the same time, so we look at each of them. So it started with the Kindaruma in 1968. That's when it was completed. Then we went to Kamburu in 1974. Then Gitaru in 1978. Then the Masinga, which is the largest one of them all. Then the reservoir is also used. The waters from the reservoir is used to empty into the other dams downstream, and the water is also used for other purposes. It was not just for the purposes of production of HEP, but it is also used for transport, for fishing, and also for irrigation. Then Kiambere in 1988, that should be in Embu or Embu County if I'm not wrong. Then, so those are the completed ones. Then we have other proposed ones. We have Mutonga and the Grand Falls, and that will make the 7 Forks dams. We also have others elsewhere, not necessarily along River Tana. We have the Takwel Gorge, which was completed in 1991. We have the Sondume Ryu, which was funded, I think, by the Japanese government, completed in 2008. So the 7 Forks dams are, as you can see them there, along the River Tana there, and others along its tributaries. You can see Sagana there, River Mutonga there, so you can see where the Mutonga is proposed, and the Grand Falls. So from the key there, you can see the proposed ones, the last one on the key there. So Mutonga and the Grand Falls are proposed. The others have been completed, as we have seen from there. So you can see where Masinga is. So Masinga is the one that's supposed to empty its waters in the other dams downstream. So the students should take heed of that diagram, so that this may be tested, or it's normally tested in exams, so know which one follows the other. So let us look at the benefits that Kenya has accrued from the 7 Forks dams along the Tana River. One is that the reservoirs provide water for irrigation and domestic use. We have looked at the case of Masinga, where the waters of the dam are used for irrigation and also for fishing, among other purposes. Then the dams also promote transport. They serve as bridges across rivers, which probably would not have been navigable, but because of the damming, then you can easily cross the river using a canoe or so. Then the dams are also a tourist attraction. We have the Masinga. Masinga is used for many recreational facilities. We have motor shows and others, so that attracts tourists. Then the dams also provide freshwater fisheries. I think I've mentioned that fishing activities will tend to take place in these areas. Then the projects have also generated employment. Of course, there are numerous people who were employed from the construction then to the operation, and also directly and indirectly by these projects. There are many people who are employed, and of course that improves their living standard. We look at the problems facing the projects. Now, one is of course shortage of capital. We have said most of these projects have relied on donor funding to be initiated, but then the donor funding does not continue throughout. The implementation depends on us. Being a developing country, then we have a shortage of capital to continue maintaining the machinery, and also, of course, ensure that the dams are also not silted. Secondly is the fluctuation of the waters. We are within the tropics. We are one area that will be, or is already experiencing, the effects of climate change in that we are experiencing prolonged droughts like currently. So because of this, we have been having fluctuations in the levels of water, which of course definitely affects production of hydroelectric power, and we are sometimes forced to go back to the thermal production using oil in Kipevu. The other one is siltation of dams. Of course, that lowers the volume of water, which of course again in turn will influence the production of electricity. Now when we are required to do dredging to remove the silt, then again that becomes another expense, adding to the expense of maintenance and of course our strained budgets. Then we also have inadequate skills and technology, which causes failure to maximize on the production costs. We are one developing country where brain drain is a reality. So even the engineers we have and all these people, most of them will tend to move out and work from elsewhere. And that of course causes a strain in our skilled labor. We look at hydroelectric power projects in Uganda. Uganda has the largest renewable freshwater resources in Africa. Uganda is fairly wet in terms of receives higher rainfall as compared to Kenya and also Tanzania. So it has a higher potential for HEP than the other East African countries. There are numerous rivers and lakes which of course have a high potential for hydroelectric power. That's why I said for the better part of the early 18th century, the 1950s, we imported electricity from Uganda. Now the country receives an average of 1,000 millimeters of rainfall throughout the year, or per year. So that is that again shows the high potential of HEP in Uganda. The River Nile is the highest potential. The River Nile comes from the Ugandan side of the Lake Victoria. That is the source and the largest river in this Africa, and as such has a very high potential for HEP. Then they have the Owen Falls, which is the Africa's largest HEP plant, constructed in 1954 and producing a whooping 165 megawatts. So you can see the potential in Uganda. They also have other dams or other projects like Kikagat and Mobuku in that country. Now in Tanzania and other parts of Africa, in Tanzania we have Nyumba ya Mungu and Hale Dam on River Pangani. We have Kagera Dam, Malagasi. Then in other parts of Africa, we have the Aswan on River Nile, that should be in Egypt. We have Kariba, which is shared resource between Zambia and Zimbabwe. And Kabora Basa on River Zambezi. We have Kainji on River Niger. We have a Kosombo Dam on River Volta in Ghana. We have the Van der Kloof on River Orange, that should be in South Africa. Inga and River Le Marenao on River Congo. So why is hydroelectric power underutilized in Africa? Well, we have the potential, but we still have not utilized the hydroelectric power potential fully. What are some of the reasons? One is inadequate financial resources. Of course, that hinders the establishment of these hydroelectric power projects, because I have said the initial cost is high. So when we don't have the resources, then it becomes a problem. Secondly is the potential in some areas, in remote areas. I mean, we have some of the potential areas being in remote areas, so it becomes uneconomical to establish the hydroelectric power plants there, and even to transport again the power from such regions. Then some or most of the countries, of course, in Africa are not industrialized, and therefore the market is not adequate, because we are not just producing electricity for for domestic use. The commercial entities are the ones which consume the most of the energy. So when we don't have them, then the market is not, or is dwindles per se. Inconsistent volume of water in rivers because of prolonged droughts in Africa. Being within the tropics, most of the parts of Africa, especially towards the north, are dry and therefore have low potential. I look at geothermal power in Kenya. Now, geothermal power accounts for just about 10% of the total power needs in the country, mainly in Olkaria. Olkaria is the one that has the highest potential. That is where Kenya has invested a lot on geothermal power, that is in Naivasha. We have other potential in Lake Bogoria, anywhere where we have fumaroles and geysers. That area has the potential for hydroelectric power production, and all of these of course are within the Rift Valley because it is the area that is geologically active. So we have other potential in Bogoria, Eburu to the north of Lake Naivasha. We have Menengai, Baringo, Magadi, Turkana, and some parts of Longonot and Suswa. We have problems of energy development in Kenya. One, of course, we face inadequate capital. I think we have discussed that extensively. We lack, or we have inadequate capital, which of course slows down the development of hydroelectric power and any other form of energy. Then a small market for power, owing to the fact that we are not that much industrialized, and therefore we are just producing power for domestic consumption. Seasonal fluctuation of waters, we have discussed this over and over. Being within the tropics and because of the effects of climate change, we face that. The siltation of dams, which you have said will require again dredging, which can be expensive. Then the location in remote areas, which of course increases production costs, and also the cost of transmission. Limited spread of solar power is also another problem. It's only now that we are trying to adapt to this issue of solar power, but that has not penetrated our market very well. Then we have little acceptance of wind power. Again, we have not been to that area per se. It's still an area that is not much exploited. And then the overexploitation of wood fuel, which we rely on heavily in most areas, especially the rural areas, and as a result, then that is resulting in overexploitation of trees, which of course is leading to desertification and even worsening the case of climate change. Look at significance of energy. Energy is used for domestic use. We use energy for very many purposes: for cooking, for lighting houses, for operating small machineries at home, and all that. Then it is also used for industries, for use in industries. Most of the industries use for different purposes. They use energy. Used in transportation, we need petroleum and diesel and all manner of fuel in the transport sector. You saw when we had a shortage of fuel in this country, you would see how transportation became chaotic. It is used in agriculture for purposes of probably use of mechanized kind of agriculture, like used in tractors for cultivation and all that. Power is also used in water supply. We need pumping of water, needs power, and so energy is also used there. For medical purposes, hospitals use a lot of energy. Machines in hospitals require energy to run. So we look at the energy crisis. Now, the energy crisis is a situation where the demand for oil is higher than the supply. Now, when that happens, and we are in a capitalistic economy where the price depends on demand and supply, so when the demand is too high and the supply is low, then the prices definitely shoot high, and that is what we call the energy crisis. Now, energy crisis is caused by over reliance on petroleum and its products. So when there is a problem that affects those that produce petroleum, or that affects production of petroleum, then definitely we plunge into an energy crisis. And we look at some of the times when we have plunged into an energy crisis. The other one is the high oil prices due to sharp rise in oil demand. It is now relied on for all manner and every other sector of the economy. So because of that, then that is causing a rise in prices, causes a crisis. Then economic and political sanctions. This is the case that we are experiencing currently in Russia. Russia being the main supplier of energy to parts of Europe, or the better part of Europe. So when sanctions are put on Russia or the Russian Federation, then goods do not move freely in the free market, and that causes a shortage and therefore a sharp rise in prices, causing an energy crisis. Then uncertainties in oil supplies to the consumers for one reason or the others. When we have uncertainties in oil supplies, then definitely the prices go up. Then the rapid depletion of oil reserves. The oil is non-renewable. The reserves are continually being deprived or being depleted, and because of that, again, the prices will continue going up, and that of course will continue creating a crisis. The other main cause is conflict in the Middle East. When we look at case studies on when we have had energy crisis, anytime we have had a conflict in the Middle East, it has definitely led to an oil crisis. Then the exhaustion of wood fuel. So that again removes the whatever we are depending on, or the alternative. So when the prices of fuel is high, and then we have the exhaustion of wood fuel because of desertification, then that again will cause another crisis because the alternative is also not there. Then mismanagement of energy, of course, will lead to losses, and as a result will lead to an energy crisis. You have seen the case of what is happening in South Africa currently. In this country, we have also faced the issue of power rationing because of mismanagement of energy. Then the oil production limits put by OPEC. OPEC is the oil producing and exporting countries. So they have their own mechanisms of ensuring that the prices of fuel do not go extremely low. So they always set limits, and we'll see when you'll be looking at sample cases what they have done in the past, and that of course can cause a serious energy crisis. Then we have artificial shortages that are caused deliberately by some countries. Countries like Russia and the US, mainly the US. The US stores a lot of fuel in its reserves. Now, when they do that, of course, you are denying this oil to circulate in the market because you are keeping it for yourself for your future use and in case of emergency. So you are depriving other countries the right to use that fuel, causing an energy crisis. Now, we look at some of the cases of energy crisis that have happened in the past that were major. Now, one of them is the 1973-1974. Now, during this time, it was just immediately after creation of the Israeli state. Now, immediately the Israeli state was created. Now, Israel invaded all its Arab neighbors, including Syria, Egypt, and Palestine, and of course all the other neighboring countries. As a result, what happened was the Arab nations that the ones that they are the main actors when it comes to the OPEC, or oil producing and exporting countries. So what they decided to do was that they withheld all the oil to all the countries that were supporting Israel in its invasion. As a result, then we had a lot of crisis, or a major oil crisis was created during that time. The second one is the 1991 First Persian Gulf War. Now, during this time, Iraq decided to invade Kuwait on three counts, or on three accusations. One is that Iraq claimed that Kuwait was part of its territory. The other one is that Kuwait was exceeding the OPEC set production levels, and Iraq also claimed that Kuwait was taking its oil from its wells underneath. Now, for those reasons, Iraq decided to invade Kuwait under the leadership of Saddam Hussein. Now, during that Persian Gulf War, a lot of oil fields were set on fire, which of course reduced the supply to the market, sharply raising the prices of oil globally. Now, in 2003, we had the second Persian Gulf War. Now, this time, the US decided to invade Iraq and to topple the leadership of Iraq under Saddam Hussein. And the US claimed that Saddam was having weapons of mass destruction. Now, after the invasion of Iraq, then the prices, of course, because of war, the Nini was destabilized. The production of oil by Iraq, which is a major oil producing and exporting country. So that destabilization of the production of oil made a sharp rise of between from 35 to 50 US dollars per barrel, which of course was significant in the world market. Now, what OPEC did to solve this problem is that it increased production per day, or up to by 8%, so that it would stabilize the prices. Now, as we move on to the impact of the energy crisis, even I want to cite a case of currently the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, or what Russian calls a special military operation, whatever you want to name it. You can still see what the global market of oil has been. And in our case in Kenya, you should look at before last year when Russia went into Ukraine, and now you can tell the difference in prices of petroleum. So these are just typical cases which may not be there in the syllabus, but it is still an energy crisis that we are experiencing today, and it has even been worse felt in Europe, which relied a lot on the Russian Federation for supply of energy and fuel and oil for that purposes, and gas. So we look at the impact of energy crisis. Now, of course, because of over reliance on oil, then when there is a crisis, then it will affect most of the sectors of the economy. One of the impacts is an increase in the price of many commodities. That is not rocket science. You can tell currently, since Russia went into Ukraine, almost all commodities, because production of any form of commodity will rely on oil. So the prices of everything in most of the countries, and our case in Kenya is a typical case, and the prices of everything have increased. I was listening to some people giving a story while I was waiting somewhere to be served, and one lady was telling the other that she went to the supermarket in the morning. She picked some commodity she wanted to buy, but when she went to the cashier, she found out that the ATM was not working. So she decided to rush to work first, and then she would purchase the same in the evening while going home. Now, by that evening, she found that whatever she had picked in the morning had increased in price by 30 shillings. Now, this is what we are talking about. That was last year. So the prices of everything will tend to go up with the increase in the prices of fuel. Secondly is the increase in the prices of imports, because importing everything becomes expensive. You are importing, bringing in goods requires either they are shipped or they are brought by air. That, of course, will again increase in their prices. Then we have a high rate of inflation that is now being experienced, I think, since we have been having this crisis. Of course, when the production costs goes high, then inflation will definitely increase, and that is for sure. Then industries are forced to lay off workers. Of course, most of the industries will close down. Those that will not close down, they are faced with serious financial crisis, and the easier way to sort these issues is to lay off workers. And of course, that will happen, and we have experienced that. We have experienced this in the recent past because of the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. Increase in the prices of other forms of energy. Of course, it is a world that is determined by supply and demand. So when oil becomes expensive, then we will move to other forms of energy like charcoal. Now the demand again for charcoal will go high, and as a result of that, then the prices will also go high. Then developing countries will run into heavy debts because their economies will crash, and the only solution they are faced with is borrowing so that they can still remain afloat. And of course, as a result of that, then they get into heavy debts. That is a typical story of Kenya, which is heavily indented as we speak. Then decrease in agricultural production will also result. I remember we said even in the agricultural sector, we require energy. We use petroleum products for running of tractors and all that. So with the increase in prices, then even increases of with the increase in the prices of other commodities that are used in the production in agriculture, then definitely agricultural production will decrease. Then decrease in the number of tourists. Of course, this will lead to hike in airfare prices. Now then, of course, and even when everybody is faced with financial crisis, then you start reducing what is not essential in life, like tourism. Then that of course will affect our sector. And remember, we are a country that depends heavily on on tourism. So when we have faced with this, then tourism will still go down, which will again affect our economy negatively. Then it will result in environmental degradation because we will now be forced to move from some clean forms of energy, and then of course the solution here, or the alternative, will be wood fuel, which is detrimental to our economy and to our environment per se. Now, how can we solve these problems of the oil crisis? One is developing alternative source of energy. I think we are doing that a lot, depending on solar, so that we do not heavily depend on oil and oil products. So improvising or getting into solar, use of biogas that is, and others, geothermal and hydroelectric power will result or will solve this problem. At least we stop over-reliance on petroleum products. Then management and conservation of energy. If we conserve the energy, then we will have more reserves, because the other thing that will set this country into, not this country but the world, into a major oil crisis if we don't act, and act fast, is now the depletion of the oil. So the better we manage oil, the better we manage other sources of energy, then we reduce the effects of low supply. Then developing nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, we said, is efficient. It is highly efficient, and therefore, because it produces a lot of energy, so that will enhance production of energy. Then encouraging industries to use coal. I'm an environmentalist. I wouldn't call for that. I wouldn't advocate for the use of coal, although we have seen some countries that had stopped using coal. Now, when Russia decided to do its military operation in Ukraine, and it cut supply of petroleum products to most of the European countries, some of them reverted back to coal. It is relatively cheaper, but it is not that environmentally friendly, and anything that is not environmental friendly, I don't advocate for it, so I'll not dwell on that point. Now, the last section is where we look at the management of energy, management and conservation of energy. We said management is more of planning. Every other time, I think in the last few topics that we have looked at, because this is something that students will be asked to differentiate between management and conservation of energy. Then we are saying that management is basically about planning, and then of course the conservation we'll see, but conservation is about measures, acting, but management is about planning. Now, some of the management measures is the control of importation of vehicles with a large engine capacity. This is something that we have tried in our country. We have higher taxes for vehicles with higher capacity of engines. I think the last time they put higher taxes on any vehicle that used petrol that was above 3000 cc. So that of course is trying to conserve energy, because when you bring in engines that are 5700 cc petrol, then the more it is going to consume and the more energy you are using, and of course that is likely to lead to a shortage in supply of energy. Then encouraging many people to use public transport. This is something that most African countries, and in particular my country Kenya, has completely been unable to deal with. Telling people to use public service, of course most of us use public service, but we use public service because we have no alternative. But anytime you get a little money, then the first thing you think of is buying a car. And then when you get more money, then everybody in the family gets a car. So in the morning, a family of 5 lives in 5 vehicles. Now, these 5 people can be carried, among others, in one public service vehicle. That will reduce pollution. That is going to reduce the amount of energy that all these vehicles are spending. And you can see that in a live scenario. Just look at when we have jam and see the number of public vehicles and the number of these small vehicles. In other countries, and especially the developed countries, they have developed public transport, the use of trains, and even the use of public transport. Just yesterday, the president of the US traveled from Ukraine to Poland by train. That is something that is not unheard of in this Africa of ours, and in particular Kenya. Every time you have a small seat, even when you are an MCA, then you move with chase cars. So you see a convoy of 15 vehicles just escorting one being. That is far from what we look for, and it is not sustainable anyway. Now, educating people on the importance of conserving energy, that is what I'm saying here, and that's why I'm insisting on these points. It's not just about teaching to pass an exam. We should be producing students who understand how to take care and to ensure that we are living sustainably. We are looking forward to a sustainable future. So that is something every other person, in a small way. In your classroom, when you move out of class, switch off the lights when you don't need them. When you see lights during the day in your house, even if you are not the one who pays the bills, just switch off the light. That small act will help conserve energy. And small things, we may think that when we are talking about environmental conservation and saving of energy is a big deal. We are talking about small measures, like in your home as a teacher or as an adult. When you heat water and store it in a thermal flask, then you are saving energy. Instead of keeping the water there, and then the water cools, and then you need hot water in a few minutes, heat again. Simple things like using a thermal flask will save energy, however small it is. If I save and you save and we all save in the little way possible, then we'll save a lot. Then proper planning of road networks to avoid traffic jams in this country. We shall speak about this later in the last topic. we spend, or we waste, because it's not even spending, we waste Kenya shillings, in billions of Kenya shillings, in traffic jams every evening in all the major cities, in Nairobi, in Kisumu, in Mombasa. Traffic jams, vehicles standing there and running their engines throughout and standing in traffic for an hour or two. That is a lot of waste. So when the government, I think the Kenya government has tried a lot in creating bypasses in most of these towns, but we have not been able to arrest the problem yet. Agroforestry, afforestation and reforestation, planting trees, planting where they have been cut down, planting where they never existed. This will ensure that when we rely on wood fuel, then we are relying on it in a sustainable way. We are one country that has not hit the recommended 10% forest cover, and therefore when we rely on wood fuel, which most of us in the rural areas rely on, then the use of wood fuel would not be sustainable. So every time you see rains, plant a tree, 1, 2, 1,000 if possible. Then banning of logging and selective felling of trees, and resettling people who have settled in forest. This has been a thorny issue in our country, Kenya, but we have tried a lot to evict people from forests. Very commendable, and the government should never shy from that for any political reasons. Forests are forests. They serve a major area. They serve a major part. It's only that we have not quantified what the services that are offered by forests and by trees. If we quantified and said a tree will save us this amount in millions or in billions, then we would understand. We had COVID-19 just the other day, and you could see people suffering to get oxygen, and people died because of lack of oxygen. That oxygen is maintained in the atmosphere by trees. So you can imagine, if we quantified that oxygen in terms of that tree and purifying the air, we could understand why we need to take care of our forests. Now we look at conservation of energy. We have said conservation is more about taking action, using available in an effective manner, and also ensuring that we conserve. I'm using the same word. Conserving is about using efficiently to avoid overexploitation, and also it's about action. Actually, we look at conservation measures. One, putting off of electricity gadgets when they are not in use. That is a direct action that everybody, it does not require a lot of, it just requires us to create a habit of switching off lights, which I do a lot in school and at home. Now, proper motor vehicle maintenance, and I think our country, we have not been able to do this a lot, but anyway, ensure from your personal capacity, even if the law is not very clear on this, but when we maintain our vehicles, we ensure that they are spending efficiently. It will save you cash, it will save our environment, it will save the nation and the world in terms of energy. Encouraging the use of public transport, again we have discussed this in details. It will ensure that we conserve the little that we have. Encouraging use of renewable energy, it will ensure that those ones that are non-renewable are not exhausted. When encouraging the use of energy saving stoves, I think we are doing well in terms of energy saving stoves. They may be expensive, because if you go to buy a jiko koa and it's going for about 5,000 and a few hundreds in the market, and a jiko, a normal one, will go for 300 to 400 in the market. So because we are in a capitalistic system, we tend to think that you take the cheaper one. Now you will spend more in terms of charcoal on that small jiko. Just if you are able to, please just buy a jiko koa. I have one here in my home. It will save you a lot in terms of saving energy. in our schools, we have seen most of the schools are trying to adopt this. Those GCOs that you use in schools, they will save a lot in terms of the energy. Now that marks the end of our beautiful topic there. Just a simple reminder: go green, use renewable energy, and you save this earth and you save this world from the disasters that we are facing in the future. Now watch out for the next video that I will release in the coming week. I think it will be about industries. Thank you for those who have continued to subscribe to my page. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much. Remember to go green, use renewable energy, save as little as you can. Thank you and God bless you.